Test. Is that better? Okay. Deuteronomy chapter 4. This is the conclusion on our study of challenging passages. Not that we've covered them all, but we've covered many of them. And these, we're talking about probably one of the greatest challenges, and that is the identification and perspective of God himself. And as we were talking about beginning last week, a little bit of a review, we're talking about early on confusing language about God. Confusing language, I mean confusing to us, that God uses. Like in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. You can look there if you want, but we're going to end up at Deuteronomy 4. And this is just a review. We talked about God said, let us make man in our image. Let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over the cattle and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. And God created man in his own image. Now see, it starts out, he says, let us make man in our image. Then in verse 27, it says, God made man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So, what are God's pronouns? Us and me, and and as we talked about, if you're a 5-year-old Jewish child and you're asking mom or dad, why does it say, let us make man in our image? And then why does it then say he made man in his image? And where did our go? And how is his image represented by a male and female? God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. In the way that can certainly be understood, if you kind of take it at face value, what is understood is God is multiplicity, which includes male and female. Because if the reflection of him is male and female, then there is male and female in this created communion, us, that's reflected in that. So, and remember, we talked about the way the Jews interpreted that was what they would call a multiplicity of splendor, which means God is so marvelous that we talk about him in plural terms. Now, I also want you to remember in Exodus chapter 20, verse 1, and other passages as well, you shall have no other gods before me. If he says you shall have no other gods before me, the implication there is there are other gods. Okay? So we have an implication that God is community made up of male and female, if male and female reflect him. And now he says, do not have any other gods. Literally, face is, before me is really face. In other words, don't have any other gods in my presence. So the implication there is, God is acknowledging that there are other gods. We're just not supposed to follow them or obey them or give them credence or whatever. Then in Deuteronomy chapter 6, hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. The Lord, and remember, the Jews wouldn't pronounce God's personal name, which we think is something like Yahweh. It's called the Tetragrammaton, don't you love that? Which means 4 letters. And it's basically YHWH. In ancient Hebrew, when they wrote, they didn't put vowels in. They had some vowel markings, but so we're not exactly sure what vowels went with that. So what was inserted is Yah and then Way, and there's reason for that I won't get into. So it's generally believed that his personal name was Yahweh, and we don't know because it was never pronounced. It was never spoken. When it's in the text, but when a Jew would read that, he would read Adonai instead of Yahweh because he didn't want to say God's name, because he didn't want to risk that his heart's not right or something and he's using God's name in vain. So they wouldn't say his name. And so when they were reading and it came along and said Yahweh, they would read Adonai, which means Lord. So often in these, especially in the Pentateuch, when you see the Lord, most often it's his personal name. This is his personal relationship name with Israel. And they wouldn't pronounce it, so Adonai. Oh, and by the way, just as an aside, this is free and it won't be on the final. The word Jehovah doesn't exist. What it is taking Yahweh, putting in the vowels from Adonai, and you come up with Jehovah, which is a synthetic word. It doesn't exist. It's a created word, which really is kind of bad for Jehovah's Witnesses, isn't it? Like I said, that was an aside. Sorry about that. Squirrel. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord, Yahweh. Yahweh is our gods, literally. The Lord, Yahweh, is one. So literally it says, Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our gods. Yahweh is one. Confusing? Yeah, you can see. Now, we have the advantage because we get to look back on this throughout history, and through the eyes of history, we understand what this is headed for. God has to tell the truth about himself, but the challenge is he has not revealed everything about himself. So when he describes himself, it's confusing if you don't have the full revelation. When is the revelation made full? Where's the full revelation of God? Christ. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. It's called Word for very, very powerful reasons. So, it's not until Christ that we get really an understanding of what Elohim and I am means plural. The root is El. So, gods. And so, kids are learning Yahweh is our God. And you look at the word our, see, that's possessive. What might that suggest? The Lord, our God, is one.
Not anybody else's God.
Yeah. What about the other God? Well, this is our God. Okay. And again, it's confusing because he's not saying the Lord God over everything. He's saying the Lord our God, our relationship. Now, I think part of the reason for that is use of his personal name. He is their God. This is his covenant name with them. Yahweh is their God. That doesn't mean there are others. It just means theirs. The one that they know is named Yahweh. All right. So, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. He doesn't in those say, I'm one and only, the only God. And I'd asked you last week, why do you think that's the case? Why in these revelations of himself did he not claim exclusivity? Now, for that, I want you to turn to Deuteronomy chapter 4. Why do you think he's focusing on the Elohim and the Lord your God, or our God, Yahweh? The Lord your God is one, not only one. It's not exclusivity. He's just saying, I'm not multiple, even though my name is. All right, in Deuteronomy chapter 4, look at verse 32. Indeed, ask now concerning the former days which were before you, since the day that God created man on the earth, and inquire from one end of the heavens to the other. Has anything been done like this great thing, or has anything been heard like it? Has any people heard the voice of God speaking from the midst of the fire, as you have heard it and survived? Or has a God tried to go to take for himself a nation from within another nation by trials, by signs and wonders, and by war, by a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm, and by great terrors, as the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? To you it was shown that you might know that the Lord, he is God. There is no other besides him. Out of the heavens, he let you hear his voice to discipline you. And on the earth, he let you see his great fire, and you heard his works from the midst of the fire. Because he loved your fathers, therefore he chose their descendants after them. And he personally brought you from Egypt by his great power, driving out from before you nations greater and mightier than you, to bring you in and to give you their land for an inheritance as it is today. Know therefore today, and take it to your heart, that the Lord, he is God in heaven, above and on earth below. There is no other. So you shall keep his statutes and his commandments, which I am giving you today, that it may go well with you and your children after you, and that you may live long on the land which the Lord your God is giving you for all time. What is God's argument here? What's his presentation or proof, if you will? What's he claiming? He's eternal. Now, why is he claiming that? I want you to understand something. Under the law, testimony cannot be given without witnesses. How do you get testimony for God? If he's going to build faith, it has to be on the assurance that he is who he says he is. How is he claiming this uniqueness? Yeah. What kind of works does he specifically allude to? Okay. Yes. The manifestation of God was made in a profound way, the deliverance of Israel from Egypt. Here's your proof. Here is testimony. Guys, think about it. When Jesus went about teaching, when he went about, he did miracles. The Holy Spirit testified, and he even talked about that you can't take my word just because I say it. And that's why so many have criticized, well, Jesus never called himself Lord. Well, he absolutely did, but the problem is he can claim anything in the world, but there has to be testimony. There has to be proof at the hands of 2 or 3 witnesses. And God is giving the proof. And he's asking them, you ever heard of a God, little g, doing this? Have you ever heard from a God, little g? Have you ever heard from somebody that has heard from a God, little g? Now, let me show you what I've done. What did he do? What did he do in Egypt? He took Egyptian gods one after another and defeated them. Guys, I'm going to suggest to you that in the ancient Near East, and even today, there's an idea that if 2 nations go to war, their gods go to war. And whichever God is most powerful, that nation will survive and win. Okay? And there's a little bit of a shadow of that when Joshua was fighting and Moses was holding up his hands. As long as he held up his hands, which was appealing to God, they won. When his hands started to droop, they started to lose. Okay, so the idea was if that God was winning or not winning based upon their trust in him or whatever. It was common belief that, like, if when Israel was fighting the Philistines, that Dagon was at war with Yahweh. When the Ark of the Covenant is stolen and taken into captivity, then the view is, at least in that battle, Dagon won. I believe all of that comes from Egypt and even before. The idea that God is showing Israel that all the gods that you have learned about your whole life, because they've been in Egypt for 400 plus years, they have been taught all the different gods. They have been taught probably like Daniel and his associates were taught. They were taught for 3 years. They were given names that reflect the gods of the Babylonians, trying to get them to rethink, trying to reprogram, etc. And Israel has been programmed now, when they come to believe in God, they believe he's a good God. He's a great God. And he tells them, the Lord your God is one. There aren't more. Now, that's not a claim to exclusivity. What it's a claim to is, I'm the only one you have. None of them helped you. None of them cried out to you. None of them talked to you, but I've done that. I have made myself known, and so that you can know that there is no other. So what he's trying to get them and understand, as we all do, that revelation is ongoing. You have to build a foundation to reveal something else, because it takes us a while to figure those out. So what he's telling them first is, I'm unique. There is no God like me. I'm one. Even though my name is plural, or my description is plural, I'm one, okay? Then he's going to share with them, not only that, I'm the only. And it's important for them to understand that there are no other gods. Why? Why is it important that they know that? Okay? That's where the notion of God being a jealous God. And guys, when we hear the word jealous, we tend to think possessive. We tend to think of like a guy in wife beater shirt, that anybody mess with his girl, he's going to mess with them, or he's going to mess with them. They even look at his girl, and if she looks sideways, he'll mess with her too. We tend to look at being jealous as being very possessive, even controlling. And that's not what he is, and that's not what this means. Why would God be jealous if there's no other gods? If there's no other suitors, say again? He wouldn't have a reason to be. Okay. If there's no other gods, he wouldn't have a reason to be. Yes. So it goes back to, is God acknowledging that there are other gods? Yes. Not that they exist, but that people serve them. What happens when people serve a God little g that is not God big G? Say again? Idolatry. And what's the consequence of idolatry? Death, eternal death. His jealousy is he doesn't want anybody to end up in hell. Guys, understand, if the whole world goes to hell, that doesn't change God. He's still God. He hasn't lost anything except objects of his love. And isn't there a sense, if you're going to go chase somebody else, fine, have them. If you're not going to be faithful to me, I don't lock this door from the outside. You're free to leave anytime you want. And if you want to leave, if you think there's somebody better out there, fine, good luck. I'll find somebody else. Did God ever talk that way? Yes. Make a new nation from him. Yes. And Moses appeals for Israel. Yes. What are the people going to think about you then if you have Exactly.
And it pleased to God on the basis of his mercy and his name. This cannot happen to you.
Yes. It's talking about a situation in which God finally tells Moses, I've had it with this nation. I'm going to destroy them. And with you, I will start a new one. I'm going to find me another girl. If she doesn't want me, fine. Go chase whoever you want to chase. Now know this, you're going to be lost because there's no one out there to chase. But if that's what you want, and that's Romans chapter 1. Whatever folks want, God turns them over to. But there are consequences to that. And the consequences are not to God, they're to them. He can make more people.
Steve is not the perfect example of the Israelites.
Pardon me?
Your question is not a perfect example of the Israelites. When they wanted a king, they already had the best. They wanted a king. Would God say, all right, go have a king? There's the perfect example of what you're talking about.
Exactly. And what did he warn them about a king? He's going to take. He's going to take your best kids. He's going to tax you. All the things he's going to do, but ultimately he's going to lead you astray. Because you already have a king. And that's another time, that's another time when he could have just washed his hands. You want a king? Fine. I'll find somebody else.
Isn't the story about Noah the prime example that he always replaces?
Absolutely. He can always replace us. Fine, break up with me. There's a lot of fish in the sea. Now, what's the challenge with that? If God found him another date, is there anyone that stays faithful? We have to be made faithful. But is there anyone who is born and stays faithful to God? No. We looked at Isaiah chapter 44 about prophet talking about someone going into the woods and finding a really nice tree. It could be fir, it could be oak, it could whatever, and cuts it down, brings it back to his house, cuts it in half, and out of half of it he makes firewood. And he talks about how great he is, he's got heat, and he can cook over it. And the other half he carves and makes an idol out of. And Isaiah's like, don't you see? You see how stupid that is? Half of it's firewood and half of it's a god. But the issue is, in verse 17 of Isaiah 44, but the rest of it he makes into a god, his graven image. He falls down before it and worships it. He also prays to it and says, deliver me, for thou art my God. Deliver me. Now, guys, one of the biggest issues in the Reformation was the use of icons. In the Roman Catholic Church, they would try, if you go into an ancient cathedral, they will have images, and they'll have stained glass windows, and those windows tell stories. And the idea was, we've got people that can't read, say in the Middle Ages, we're going to show them in graphics what God is. And part of the Reformation was, you're making images. And God said, don't make any image of anything and worship it. Yet you're giving homage to these things. At St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, there's a statue of Peter that people pray to, and it's a bronze statue, and it's elevated, but they can put their hand on his foot. And believe it or not, he has had more than one great toe worn off by people touching it and giving homage to that. And in the Reformation, there was this cry that that's idolatry. You can have idolatry of things associated to God by worshiping them rather than God. And that's going to lead us to a discussion in just a moment of the greatest idolatry, and that is calling on Yahweh and yet attributing to him things that are not his. In other words, we can make an idol out of our perception of God versus who he really is. You understand that Jews, Christians, and Muslims all worship the same being, correct? You understand that Jews worship Yahweh. You understand that Muslims worship Allah, okay? Both of them are the same one, by the way. They're both the God of Abraham, and that's where these two nations come from, is the Jewish nation and the Arab nation, or Arab people, okay? They worship the same God. They serve the same God by different names and with different teachings and statutes, etc. And then Christians come along, and we worship the same God. Now, what's the difference? They're all worshiping the same God. Okay, yes, they put him in their own box. I want you to remember John 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. If you understand what I mean, is the notion of Allah true? Is the notion of Allah true? If you can only come to God through Jesus, and Muslims have rejected Jesus, they acknowledge he was a prophet, they just don't accept that he is deity. What does that make of Allah? Yeah, isn't that ironic? That the God of Abraham is in their mind a false God. Because he's a different God than he has revealed himself to be. Remember what we said, the ultimate revelation of God is in Christ. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Verse 14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory as of the only begotten. He showed us God. He showed us a God that we have not yet fully seen. And then he went on to say, there is no access to God except through me, him. So someone who worships God outside of Christ is not worshiping in truth. Then what of their God? If I'm worshiping God in a way that is not truth, what does my perception of God then become? Something other than God. And that can only be an idol. Anything that is worship that is not God, as revealed through Christ, as well as the Old Testament. I'm not putting those against, but the full revelation came through Christ. To worship any being and call any being by any name that is not that, that's a false God. Do you understand what I mean when I say that's a false Yahweh? On one level, Yahweh can't be little g, false God. But our perceptions of him can be. We can make an idol of something that is not God and call it God. But we don't call it Dagon, we call it Yahweh. Or as we tend to, God. Yet it's an idol. That's ironic and strange to think about. But that brings us to the point that idols, and God said, don't make any images. And guys, I was shocked when Windows first came out. And I was an old DOS guy, and then Windows came out. And what did they call their little pictures? Icons. You know what an icon is? It's a representation of deity. And I thought, oh my goodness, here's Microsoft. Well, how dare you? How dare you? And what it demonstrates is, what it demonstrates is taking things that are involved with deity and profaning them. Galatians chapter 1, verse 6. I am amazed that you're so quickly deserting him who called you by the grace of Christ for a different gospel, which is really not another, only there are some who are disturbing you and want to distort the gospel of Christ. But even though we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to that which we have preached to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before, so I say now again, if any man is preaching to you a gospel contrary to which you received, let him be accursed. For am I now seeking the favor of men or of God? Or am I striving to please men? If I were still trying to please men, I would not be a bondservant of Christ. Look at that first sentence of that in verse 6. What does a different gospel do? Okay? It distorts the image of God. What do we call a distorted image of God? Say again? Yeah, idol. Exactly. Idol. That's why God said, don't make an image of me out of anything, because you can't. You cannot describe me, you cannot draw me, you cannot, etc. So anything that you do is not going to reflect me. You're the reflection of me, nothing else. Okay. Notice in verse 6, I am amazed you are so quickly deserting him. Who's the him? Is this thing on? Specifically Christ. You're rejecting him by another gospel. What's the other gospel? Exactly. Anything other than what you've received. Anything. Could it be this? Yes. Could it be this? Yes. Could it be this? Yes. Could it be Judaism? Yes. Could it be that you still need to be circumcised? Yes. Could it be that we're saved through obedience to commandments? Yes. Anything other than the grace that you have received from Christ for a different gospel, which is deserting him. It's not just I have different beliefs. It's you're deserting him. And guys, that sets the basis for what so easily happens in the world and so easily happens in our culture and so easily happens with us, and that is serving a God that we make him to be. Serving a God that that reflects our desires, that reflects our perspective, that reflects our sense of right or justice or whatever. Can you give me some examples of how we might reflect Yahweh in a way that is not him, and that image that we reflect can become a false god? Draw from culture.
Love means accepting everything.
There you go. God is love. He accepts everyone. That part's true, but that's where people stop. He'll take you where you are, but he doesn't leave you there. He takes you where you are, but you have to grow and change, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's a false God. You see how insidious this becomes? Because Paul was saying, I'm amazed that you so quickly reject him by going to another. Well, your perspective is that he's this way. My perspective is that he's this way. And it all subject to your opinion, your perspective, etc. What are some others? Pardon? There you go. There's a great one. We're all on the same road. There's many roads that go to heaven. What's a response to a statement like that? We're on different paths, but we're all headed the same way. Yeah. What did God say about that? Yeah. He didn't say, I am a way. I am the way. How many ways are there? How many paths are there? How many roads? There are two roads that Jesus described. One that leads to salvation, one that leads to condemnation. Okay? And talk about multiple roads. That is a human creation to make ourselves feel better about where we are and to reduce our responsibility to be evangelistic, those who have that gift. Okay. Any others?
No action, just say it.
Say again?
No action required, just say you believe.
There you go. If I call on the name of the Lord, that's all I have to do. I have to live a life, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. God just wants me to be happy. Have you heard that one? Sounds great. God just wants me to be happy. Don't worry, be happy. What did God say? You see, we have created God to be in our image. We have projected onto him our values. And guys, please understand, we all need to warn ourselves because this is a almost universal human tendency. That's where idolatry comes from. That's why men create gods, is so they can project onto them their values, their desires, and live by that. That's why folks follow Satan. It's not because they're going to be first in line in hell, but following Satan, who is the opponent of God, allows me to live an ungodly life, yet still have a master, a God. Do you think Satan respects that? Look at what Isaiah said. They carve out this thing and then they say to it, deliver me. Provide for me, protect, give me, bless me, harbor me. They say that to a chunk of wood. We've got folks saying that to Satan. Save me. Deliver me. To what? To hell? Is that? I mean, do they sing? We're marching to hell, terrible, terrible hell. We're It's absurd. And so when God said, when he first, even in the Ten Commandments, he first established who he was. And he warned them against idolatry. But guys, our tendency, I think, is to think of idolatry in terms of a graven image or a false Asian religion or something like that. What I want you to understand is idolatry is any form of creating a God in your image and projecting onto him your emotions, your anything, without going and saying, wait a minute, that's not what God said. God said just the opposite. I don't like that, but I'm going to accept that because he is the only God. And he is true and right. Therefore, what he says is true and right. It doesn't have to pass my joy level because he's sovereign. In any other perspective becomes, and in the, I think Satan's most powerful use of idolatry is to have us serve Yahweh, but just not the Yahweh that God describes himself to be, and to serve him in the way that he teaches us. To do anything other than that is to project ourselves on God and make him in our image.
Steve, I have a question.
Yeah.
So, if changing the one gospel that we receive, like Galatians 1:6, turns it into a different gospel, which is a distortion, is that the basis for silence and not permission in regards to questions and things?
Yes. Yes. Very good point.
Steve, also, there's a lot of congregations in this world that don't believe in the blood. They don't, I mean, they don't teach acts at all.
Mm.
That's, to me, a big distortion.
Yeah, and that's a great segue. In the sermon, I'm going to be talking about a covenant of blood. And there is no salvation outside of a bloody covenant. And there's a lot of bloodless covenant being taught. It doesn't involve blood, doesn't involve contacting the blood. There are a lot of folks who are being told they could be saved outside of the blood of Christ. And they don't know how to contact the blood of Christ, and don't even know that the covenant is a blood covenant. Yeah, exactly. That's a great segue to the sermon that we're going to have in just a few moments. So based on that, let's go ahead and take a break, get ready for our assembly, and we'll have then, I guess, part two. Well, it's got graven images on it. Yeah.